What if Robert Baratheon learned the truth at the Winterfell feast and knelt to Jon Snow? Let's explore the depths of it in the video. The gates of Winterfell stand open when the royal column rides through. It is a grey morning, the kind the north does well, the sky heavy and low above the stone walls. Robert Baratheon leads the procession on a destrier that struggles under the king's weight, and the sight of him stops the breath in the yard in a way that has nothing to do with ceremony. 15 years on the Iron Throne have not been kind to him. The broad-shouldered warrior who once hammered Rhaegar Targaryen into the trident is still somewhere inside that body. But he is not easy to find anymore. He is 36 years old and looks older. He scans the courtyard as he rides in, and for just a moment his eyes are sharp and searching, the way a soldier's eyes move before the fighting starts. The Stark household lines the yard in welcome. Ned stands at the front, weathered and still, the same man Robert has always known. Catelyn holds the line at his side, red-haired and composed, carrying herself with a steadiness that does not waver. Robb is at his mother's shoulder, 15 years old and already broad, with his mother's colouring and his father's bearing. Sansa stands nearby, 11 and poised beyond her years, her eyes already fixed on the Queen's wheelhouse. Arya is beside her, 9 years old, looking at everything except the Queen. And further back, half swallowed by the ranks of household men, Jon Snow stands where bastards stand. He is 15, dark-haired, with a long face and grey eyes that give nothing away. To anyone looking, he is Ned Stark's base-born son, and so he occupies the edges of things, behind the family and apart from it. Joffrey rides near the column's middle, 12 years old, golden-haired, looking around Winterfell with an expression that says he has already decided it is not worth much. Sandor Clegane walks at his heel, enormous in dark armour, the burned side of his face turned into the wind. Tyrion Lannister rides near the rear of the column, a cup already in hand, looking at Winterfell's grey walls with the calm attention of a man who catalogues everything he sees. Robert drops from his horse and grabs Ned by both shoulders. "You've gotten fat," he says. Ned looks back at him and says nothing about the obvious. Robert laughs, and it sounds like it costs him something. But before the feast, Robert asks to go to the crypts. Ned leads him down below Winterfell. The stone steps are worn smooth with age. Torchlight slides across the carved faces of dead kings of winter as they walk deeper, and the air goes cold and still in a way that feels older than the castle above. Robert walks without speaking. He is not drunk yet, and without the wine, the grief sits right at the surface. He finds her at the passage's end. Lyanna Stark, carved in stone, forever 17. Stone cannot hold what she had, but Robert stops in front of her and goes quiet in the way he is almost never quiet anymore. He reaches into his cloak and places a small white feather at the base of the statue. His hand does not let go of it right away. "She should have been mine," he says. Ned has heard this before. He has heard it in a dozen forms across 15 years, and every time Robert says it, Ned feels the secret like a stone behind his ribs. Standing here now, in the dark, looking at the king's broad back, Ned lets himself see what he has been refusing to look at. Robert is 36 years old. He is killing himself with wine and grief and the slow poison of everything the Iron Throne has made of him. He will not see 50, and when he dies, the truth goes with him, and Jon Snow will be left in a world that does not know what he is. Ned thinks about Jon Arryn. The old man had been asking questions about the children's colouring, tracing Baratheon bloodlines, looking for something that should not have been there to find. He had not lived to tell anyone what he found. Ned has the notes. He has read them on the road north, at night, with a candle going low. The children are not Robert's. The realm's succession will fall to a Lannister bastard, wearing a Baratheon name, and no one living knows it except Ned. He speaks before he has decided to. Robert, there is something I should have told you 15 years ago. Robert does not turn around. Ned. Jon is not my son. The crypt is very quiet. A torch gutters. Robert's hand goes tight on the stone and then releases. He is Lyanna's, Ned says. She is his mother. Rhaegar Targaryen is his father. They were married in secret in Dorne, after Rhaegar had his first marriage annulled, with a septon to witness the ceremony. When the war ended and I rode to the Tower of Joy, I found her there. She was dying. She had just given birth to a boy. He does not stop. He has rehearsed this, and never once made it through without his voice threatening to break. She made me promise to keep him safe. She knew what the world would do if it found out. So I brought him home and called him mine. Robert turns around. His face is something Ned has never seen on it before. Not grief exactly, not rage. Something with both inside it that has not chosen yet. She went willingly, Ned says, to Rhaegar. She was not taken. Robert looks at him for a long time. Then he asks why now. 15 years of silence. And now? Ned tells him. Jon Arryn is dead. Robert is destroying himself by inches, and the children who carry his name are not his children. Ned does not have proof fit for a Maester, but Jon Arryn found the pattern, and Ned has seen the same notes. He names the suspicion plainly. Robert's eyes go sharp for a moment when Cersei's name enters it. Then they drift back toward the statue. He does not want to hear about Joffrey. He looks at Lyanna's face. She went willingly, he says again, quieter. Yes, Ned says. She loved him. Robert sits down on the stone floor in front of a statue. He does not say anything else. Ned waits, and then leaves him in the dark. He pauses at the top of the steps. The feast noise comes down the corridor like a wave, laughter and warmth and the sound of cups. Below him, Robert is still sitting with a dead woman's stone face and 15 years of the wrong story. Above, the great hall of Winterfell is already alive with light. Fires burn along the walls. Somewhere in the warmth and noise of the feast, at the far end of the hall where the household men eat and the bastards sit away from family, a dark-haired boy of 15 finds his seat and has no idea that the world has just changed around him. Robert comes back to the great hall late. The feast is well underway by the time he appears in the doorway, the noise of it rolling out ahead of him. Laughter from the lower tables, the smell of roasting meat, the glow of fires along the stone walls. He is not drunk. That is the first thing Cersei notices when she sees him take his seat at the high table. She has watched Robert Baratheon walk into 100 rooms over 15 years of marriage, and she has learned to read the quality of his absence from sobriety, the way a sailor reads cloud cover. This is different. He sits down beside her and looks out at the hall, and his face is closed in a way that has nothing to do with wine. Ned, at the far end of the high table, watches him come and settle, and he keeps his own face as still as he can. Across the hall, Jon Snow sits among the household men at the far end of the long tables. He is where bastards sit, away from the family. He is dark-haired and long-faced, a boy who looks like Ned Stark in miniature, and in any other moment, on any other night, no one at the high table would have any reason to look at him twice. But Robert cannot stop looking at him. He searches the boy's face the way a man searches a map for a place he knows is there, but cannot locate. grey eyes, the line of the jaw, something around the brow. Robert is looking for Lyanna in him, and every time he thinks he does not find her, he looks again. Joffrey, at Cersei's other side, is busy performing his boredom for anyone who cares to notice. He tears bread without eating it. He taps the table. He has decided Winterfell is beneath him, and everything he does says so. Robert does not look at Joffrey at all. Jon feels the attention before he understands it. He is 15 years old and a bastard at his Lord Father's feast, which means he has practiced at being overlooked, and so being watched by the King of the Seven Kingdoms lands on him like cold water. He keeps his head down, eats carefully, says nothing to the men beside him. Across the room, Robb notices. Robb is seated at the proper table with the family, and he has known Jon his whole life, and so he reads the set of Jon's shoulders the way he reads weather. Something is wrong. He looks across the hall at Jon and then at Robert, and then back at Jon, and he catches Jon's eye and gives him the smallest possible look that means, "Be still." Jon gives nothing back. He has always been good at that. Robert sees none of this exchange. He is not watching Robb or Theon or anyone at the proper tables. He is watching Jon, and the thing on his face is not scrutiny. It is closer to what a man feels when he finds something he didn't know he was looking for. Theon Greyjoy, seated next to Robb, catches the exchange between the brothers and leans toward Robb, with his mouth already forming a question. Robb does not let him finish. He answers quietly, the way Ned has always taught him, without looking away from his plate. Theon closes his mouth and sits back, and he watches the far end of the hall with the expression of a young man who senses something happening, but cannot find its shape. Tyrion Lannister has placed himself at the side of the table, with a good angle on the room and a full cup of wine, which is his preferred arrangement for any occasion. He watches Robert staring at Ned's bastard. He watches Ned watching Robert with an expression of such careful neutrality, it is nearly invisible. Nearly. Tyrion has spent his life reading rooms that do not want to be read, and what he reads in this one is something that passed between king and lord in the crypts below this castle, something that has rearranged the furniture inside both of them. He does not know what it is, but he commits it to memory, and he drinks, and he keeps watching. Cersei draws Robert into conversation. She is good at this, at shaping a question to sound like passing interest, at pitching her voice to carry only as far as the person beside her. She asks about the road north, about his shoulder, about Joffrey's impression of Winterfell. Robert gives her the shortest answers that still qualify as answers. She studies him between sentences. She has been watching him for 15 years, and she knows the difference between the silences of wine and the silence of something a man carries. This is the second kind. She waits until a song rises from the lower tables and covers her voice, and then she asks plainly, "What did Ned say to you in the crypts?" Robert looks at her. "Nothing that concerns you," he says. He turns back to the hall. Cersei does not move. She has seen Robert dismiss her hundreds of times with the weariness of a man who finds her inconvenient. This is not that. This has intention behind it. She looks at Ned at the far end of the high table, who is looking at his cup. She looks across the hall at the bastard boy, who is not looking at anyone. She looks back at Robert, who is. Something is happening in this castle tonight, and she does not know what it is yet. That is the most dangerous kind of something. Robert reaches for his cup. He lifts it, not high, not in a way anyone would read as a toast. Just a small and private motion aimed toward the far end of the hall. Jon does not see it. He is looking at his plate. Robert drinks, and then he sets the cup back down with wine still in it. For the first time in longer than he can name, he leaves a cup unfinished. The feast winds down into the late hours, and then empties. Ned sits in the great hall after the others have gone, watching the household move through the last of the clearing. The fires burn lower. The banners of Stark and Baratheon hang above him on the walls in the fading light, grey direwolf and black stag, side by side, the way they have been through 3 kings and one long secret. Ned does not know what Robert will do with what he has been told. He does not know if he has saved something tonight or broken it. The hall goes quiet around him, and he sits with that not knowing until the last torch goes out. The knock on Ned's door comes before first light. He is already half awake, the kind of restless sleep a man gets when he has set something in motion and cannot be sure where it lands. A servant stands in the corridor with a torch and says the king is asking for him, not requesting. Asking is a courtesy that kings rarely bother with, and Robert in particular has never had much use for the word. Ned pulls on his clothes and follows the torch down the corridor without speaking. Robert is not in bed. He is in the chair by the window of his guest chambers, looking down at the dark courtyard of Winterfell, and he is not drunk. There is a candle burning on the sill beside him, and an untouched cup of wine sitting on the table behind him. The fire in the hearth has burned down to coals. The hour before dawn in the north is still and very cold, and Robert sits in it like a man who has not moved for some time. He does not turn when Ned enters. "Tell me about Cersei's children," he says. Ned had known this was coming from the moment he named his suspicion in the crypts. He had dreaded it with the particular dread of a man who has decided to tell the truth and must now keep telling it past the point where the first part was already almost more than he could manage. He closes the door and confirms it plainly, the way he has always delivered hard news, directly, without ornament, the golden colouring on all 3 children, impossible for Robert's bloodline if you trace it honestly. The genealogies John Arryn had pulled, the pattern the old man followed through the records and the histories until someone decided he had followed them far enough. The notes Ned has been reading on the road north, alone at night with a candle going low, all of it consistent, all of it pointing at the same conclusion. Robert listens without interrupting. He does not rage. He does not reach for the cup behind him. He sits with his face turned toward the courtyard, and when Ned finishes, the silence runs long before he breaks it. "So I have no heir." His voice is flat, not broken. Cersei's secret does not hit him the way Jon's truth did in the crypts. There is no collapse in it, none of the raw and sudden weight of learning that the woman he loved and mourned had a living child he never knew. What Robert feels now is colder. He had known it, Ned realizes, or some part of him had. Known it for years in the way that a man knows things he refuses to examine, and the wine had kept that part quiet. Sitting sober in the dark above Winterfell's courtyard, what Robert feels is confirmation rather than revelation. A man told that the trap he walked into 15 years ago was exactly the kind of trap he always suspected. "You have a son," Ned says. Robert goes still in a different way. Then he turns and looks at Ned directly for the first time since he entered the room. "He is sitting in a hall full of your servants," Ned says, "because you never knew to look at him." The silence after that is different from the ones before it. Robert turns it over for a long moment. Then he asks what Lyanna named the boy. "She didn't," Ned says. "She was dying. She had just given birth. There was no time for it." He pauses. "I named him Jon." Robert turns back to the window. "Jon," he says quietly. Then, after a moment, Lyanna would have called him something fiercer. Ned almost smiles. He cannot quite stop it. Yes, he says, she would have. For a moment, they are just two men who spent their youth loving the same woman and lost her before they were old enough to know how to bear it. And they are talking about her son. There is no throne in the room with them right now. No succession, no realm, no 15 years of lies between them. Just a dark-haired boy who had her eyes and a name she never got to choose, and two men who between them know more about her than anyone else living. The moment passes. Robert straightens in his chair and asks what the boy is like. Ned answers honestly. Jon is serious in ways boys his age are usually not. Honorable, sometimes to his own cost, the way Starks tend to be. Skilled with a sword, better than his years should allow. He has the discipline of someone who decided early that nothing would be given to him, and so worked for everything twice as hard as the boys who stood to inherit something. He looks more Stark than anything else. Dark hair and grey eyes, and the long face that runs through Ned's family, which was both nature and a kind of protection. He does not know who he is. He has never known. He thinks of himself as Ned's son. He calls himself a Stark. Ned has let him because there was no other way to keep him safe, and because it was also true. Robert is quiet. Then, he's 15 and he doesn't know he's a king. No, Ned says. And that was by design. Anyone who knew would have had him killed. I could not think of another way to keep him safe. Robert nods slowly. Aye, he says, looking past Ned at something that is not in the room. And I might have been one of them. He says it without pride or shame. He says it the way a man says a thing he has looked at, honestly, and decided not to flinch from. The sky outside has begun to lighten at the edges, the hard dark of the night thinning toward grey. Robert tells Ned to say nothing to anyone until he has had time to think. Not Catelyn. Not Robb. Not the boy. Ned agrees because there is nothing else to say. Robert turns back to the window. Below in the courtyard, the first of the household are beginning to move. Torches crossing the dark in ones and twos, the castle waking itself the way it does every morning. Robert watches them. He is still watching when Ned slips out and pulls the door shut behind him. Somewhere below, before the training ground fills, a dark-haired boy of 15 will come out with a sword. He will work through his forms in the cold before anyone else arrives, alone with the grey morning coming, the way he does every day. He will not know that two men sat above him through the dark and talked about who he is. Dawn comes slow to Winterfell's Godswood. The great trees stand dark and close, their roots deep in ground that has not fully thawed since autumn, and the air between them holds the cold, the way stone holds cold, dense and still and older than the walls around them. At the centre of it all, where the heart tree has stood, since before anyone now living can trace the memory, the pale trunk rises out of the earth with its carved face watching everything. Red sap eyes. A mouth cut into the wood. The first men put their faith here, and the faith stayed. Whatever truth is spoken in front of this tree, the old gods hear it. Jon Snow has been in the Godswood since before the sky started to lighten. He does it most mornings, comes out before the household wakes, because the Godswood is the one place in Winterfell where no one is watching him to see if he belongs. He works through his forms alone in the cold, precise, and unhurried, moving through the patterns his sword masters have drilled into him over years until they are as natural as breathing. He is 15, and he moves like someone older, controlled in his footwork, economical with the blade. Ghost lies near the roots of the heart tree, white as fresh snow against the dark earth, watching the tree line with red eyes that miss nothing. The Godswood belongs to both of them in the early hours. No one else comes here at this time of day. Jon does not hear Robert until the king is already inside the tree line. Robert has come alone. No guards, no servants, no ceremony. He stands at the edge of the Godswood and watches Jon train for a long moment without speaking, the way a man watches something he is afraid to disturb by acknowledging it. Then he walks in. Jon hears the footsteps, stops, turns. He is still for a moment, then bows, the correct bow for a bastard to a king, and waits. Robert looks at him for a long time, long enough that it becomes strange. "You have her eyes, you know," he says finally. "Grey, like the north." Jon does not know what to do with this. He waits. Robert walks to the heart tree and sits down heavily on one of its great roots, which is thick enough to make a bench and old enough that the bark is smooth with weather. A king sitting on a tree root would look undignified in most circumstances, but Robert has never placed much value on looking dignified. He gestures for Jon to put the sword away, and Jon sheathes it and stands. Robert asks him about his training, about what he reads, about who he thinks is the finest fighter in the Seven Kingdoms. Jon answers carefully. He is a bastard being questioned by a king in his lord father's Godswood before the breakfast hour, and he does not know how to read the situation, so he keeps his answers short and honest, and gives nothing he has not been directly asked for. He names Sir Arthur Dane when Robert asks about fighters. Robert raises an eyebrow at that. "Good answer," his expression says, but he does not say it aloud. He asks a few more things, and Jon answers. And then Robert goes quiet, and the silence runs long enough that the birds start again in the trees above them. Then Robert says, "You know what they call me, boy?" Jon has been raised in a house that tells war stories at the fire. He knows what they call Robert Baratheon. But he answers carefully, "I have heard many things, your grace." "Demon of the Trident," Robert says. He watches Jon's face when he says it. "The man who killed the dragon prince." He pauses. "I killed your father." Jon goes completely still. He does not understand at first. His father is in Winterfell, 200 feet away, probably awake by now. He says so. "My father is Lord Eddard Stark, your grace." Robert shakes his head. And then he tells him everything, plainly, the way a soldier gives a report, without softening and without pausing for the listener to catch up. Robert made this decision in the dark hours of the night, and he is not going to lose his nerve now. Rhaegar Targaryen married Lyanna Stark in secret, in Dawn, with the annulment of his first marriage witnessed by a septon. Lyanna went to him willingly. She was not taken or forced or stolen. She loved the man and left to be with him, and Robert built a war on the story that she was kidnapped because that was the story he needed. At the Tower of Joy, at the end of the rebellion, Ned found her dying. She had just given birth. She made Ned promise to keep the child safe from the people who would want him dead, which included Robert, who knows this, and says so plainly. And so Ned brought the boy home and called him his own bastard and raised him as a Stark. Jon stands in the Godswood and takes all of this in. His face goes through things. Disbelief first, complete and reflexive, the kind that comes before understanding has caught up. Then underneath that, something colder, a controlled panic pressing up against the inside of him that he holds down the way you hold down a fire in a high wind. And then, under all of it, a stillness that is not calm, a stillness that has nothing left. "Lord Stark is my father," he says. Robert says, "Lord Stark kept a promise to his dying sister." Jon looks at Ghost. The direwolf has not moved from the roots. He is watching Jon now, not the tree line, the red eyes steady. Jon does not speak. Robert gets to his feet. Jon is not looking at him. Robert says, "I killed your father. I built a war on the lie that he stole your mother, and she went willingly because she knew I would never be what she needed." He stops. He looks at Jon, who is still not looking back at him. Then Robert Baratheon lowers himself to one knee on the cold earth of the Godswood, in front of the heart tree, in front of a 15-year-old boy who does not know what to do with any of this. "I cannot give you back your mother," Robert says. "I cannot give you back your father. But I will not leave Lyanna's son kneeling in the dirt at the far end of a hall." The Godswood is completely quiet. The carved face in the heart tree watches both of them with its unreadable red eyes. Jon says, "Get up." He does not say it as a king commands a subject. He says it as a boy says the only thing he can think of to say. Robert stays on one knee. Ghost rises from the roots and walks to Jon's side and sits, pressing his white flank against Jon's leg, warm against the cold morning. Jon looks at the heart tree. He looks at it for a long time. "Lord Stark is my father," he says again. Robert says, "Yes. And Lyanna Stark was your mother." Jon closes his eyes. Robert rises. The conversation is unresolved, but the truth is spoken, and spoken in front of the weirwood, and the old gods are not known for forgetting. He tells Jon they will speak again soon. He tells him to say nothing to anyone. Jon nods, a small motion. He watches Robert turn and walk back through the Godswood, between the great dark trees, until the tree line takes him. Then Jon sits down on the ground in the place where Robert was kneeling. He puts both hands deep in the fur at Ghost's neck, and the direwolf does not move, and Jon breathes. Ned learns of it before the morning meal. The king was in the Godswood with Jon before dawn, alone, for the better part of an hour. He goes to Robert's chambers immediately and finds him at the window in the same chair as before, but different inside it. The wine on the table has not been touched. Robert looks like a man who has set something heavy down. Ned closes the door. He keeps his voice even. "What did you say to him?" Robert says, "I told the boy who he is." The silence that follows fills the room entirely. Ned stands in the center of it and understands what has happened. 15 years of concealment, carried in the dark across the width of a continent, spoken aloud to a 15-year-old in the Godswood before the household woke. Robert watches him understand it, and he does not apologize. Ned asks, "What did he say?" Robert says, "He told me to get up." A pause. Good instinct for a king. Jon moves through the morning by reflex. He works in the yard. He eats at the household table. He speaks when he is spoken to, and does not start conversations he has not been invited into. He does the things a bastard does in the order he always does them, because routine is the one thing he knows how to hold on to when everything else has gone uncertain. He does all of it badly. His timing is off in the yard. He cuts his food without tasting it. He watches distances that are not there, and there is something in his face that none of the household men can name, but all of them notice. He is carrying something, and it shows in the way he moves, which has never been like this before, never this careful, never this interior. Robb notices within the hour. By mid-morning he has pulled Jon into a side passage near the armory and closed the door behind them. "What did the king say to you?" "Nothing," Jon says. Robb says his name. Just that. Jon looks at the floor. He says, I cannot tell you. Not yet. And then he turns and walks back toward the yard. In 15 years, Jon has never walked away from Robb without a reason he was willing to name. Robb stands in the passage and tries to find the edges of this new thing, and cannot. Catelyn has been watching Ned all morning. She has spent 14 years learning which silences belong to grief, and which to thought, and which to the particular weight of something a man is holding, but cannot yet put down. The silence on Ned this morning is none of those familiar kinds. She finds him in his solar in the early afternoon. She closes the door and asks directly, "What did you tell him?" Ned looks up from the desk, where he has not been working. "The king knows," he says. Catelyn stands still. "Knows what?" Ned meets her eyes. "Everything." She sits down, not with composure, but with the abruptness of someone whose knees have made a decision. She looks at the space between her hands for a moment, then at her husband. "How long?" she asks. "Since 2 nights ago." She nods slowly. Something moves across her face that is not anger, but is built from similar material. She has known Jon Snow for 15 years, and spent most of that time resenting him for a crime that was Ned's and not the boy's. That knowledge sits differently now, weighted differently against the image of Ned carrying this alone across 14 years. She does not ask anything else. She looks at the wall, and then she looks at the door through which Jon will eventually pass, and something she has been certain about for 14 years is no longer fully certain. She does not know yet what to do with that. She is not a woman who moves quickly toward warmth when it has been withheld this long. But she is also not a woman who refuses to see what is in front of her. Cersei spends the afternoon conducting a careful audit of everyone who was near Robert that morning. Through conversation, through questions posed as interest rather than investigation, she assembles the shape of it. The king went to the Godswood alone before dawn. He was with Ned Stark's bastard for nearly an hour. He returned without calling for wine. She sits with this and knows what it means. She finds Sandor Clegane outside Joffrey's door. She tells him quietly to keep the prince away from the bastard's usual routes through the castle, to keep him close and occupied. Sandor does not ask for explanation. Cersei moves on. The watching has begun. Tyrion passes Jon in a corridor that afternoon and almost says something. He has something wry ready, which he usually does, but Jon is moving fast and not looking at anything, and by the time Tyrion opens his mouth, the boy is already gone around the corner. Tyrion stands with his supply list and looks at the empty corridor. Something has shifted in Winterfell, he thinks. Something that was below the surface is now above it, and the ground has not settled. He notes this in the way he notes all useful things and walks on. Night. The castle goes quiet in its usual stages, fire by fire, until the great building is down to its bones. Jon knocks on Ned's solar door and goes in and closes it, and stands in the center of the room. He says, "Is it true?" Ned puts down the candle. He looks at the boy in front of him, dark-haired, grey-eyed, carrying the Stark face that served as his cover story for 15 years. And he doesn't hide. He says, "Yes." Jon sits down across from him, without being invited. He puts his hands on his knees. He is very still, the stillness of the Godswood, of a person who has nothing left to reach for. Ned does not talk about the Iron Throne. He does not talk about succession or decrees or the machinery that will eventually grind through all of this. He talks about Lyanna. He tells Jon what she was like. Not the statue in the crypts, not the name Robert says like a wound, but the actual person. how she moved, what she found funny, the way she rode, which was not the way a Stark girl was supposed to ride, the way she said exactly what she thought at the moment she thought it, which was either going to make her magnificent or destroy her, and most days it was both. He tells Jon she was the most alive person he has ever known, and that losing her was the particular kind of loss that does not get smaller. Jon sits through all of it without speaking, not crying, barely in the room. When Ned is done, Jon is quiet for a long time. Then he asks one question. "Did she want me?" Ned looks at his son, the boy he brought home and lied for and loved, and is not finished loving, the promise he made in a tower in Dorne, with her hand in his, and her eyes already going far. He says, "She died making sure you lived." Jon looks at the candle. He says nothing. After a long time he gets up, and Ned stands, and neither of them says the thing that is in the room. They are not a king's son, and the man who kept him hidden. They are just themselves. And Jon goes out, and the door closes, and Ned stands in his solar in the dark. 2 days after the Godswood, Robert calls the household and the royal party to the great hall with no explanation given and no announcement made. The servants assume it is a departure ceremony of some kind. The king's column has been at Winterfell long enough, and the roads south are best travelled before the season turns. People file in and find their places. The Stark household takes the hall's near side, the royal party the far. Robb stands at the front, as Ned's heir should, his face set in the neutral expression he has been practicing since the morning Jon walked away from him without a reason. Catelyn holds a position just behind Ned's shoulder. She knows what is coming. Ned told her this morning, not what Robert would say, but that Robert would say something. And she stands with her hands quiet at her sides, in the manner of a woman who has decided to endure whatever the next hour requires. Jon is at the back of the hall where he always stands. He has been told by Ned only that something is coming. He knows enough. He stands against the wall near the doorway with Ghost at his heel, and he watches the room fill. Cersei is already at the high table when the others arrive. She has dressed carefully and arranged her expression into the smooth, unreadable surface she has been perfecting since she was a girl at Casterly Rock. She watches the room with the attention of a woman who has spent 15 years reading courts, knowing that what matters in a gathering like this is never the thing that gets said, but the thing that happens to the people around you when they hear it. Robert stands at the front of the hall. He does not have a prepared speech, or if he does not read it. He speaks the way he has always spoken when he means something, directly, without ornament, the voice of a soldier who has decided what he is going to say and is going to say it. He tells the assembled hall that Jon Snow is not Ned Stark's bastard son. He says it plainly, in that order, because that is the lie he is dismantling, and you dismantle a lie by first naming it. He tells them that Jon is the legitimate son of Rhaegar Targaryen, Crown Prince of the Seven Kingdoms, and Lyanna Stark of Winterfell, born of a lawful marriage in Dorne, witnessed and sealed, and that his name, his true name, is Aegon Targaryen. He tells them that under the law of the realm, this boy is the rightful heir to the Iron Throne, and that he, Robert Baratheon, first of his name, is naming him. So before this company as an act of public record. The great hall of Winterfell is completely silent. Outside, the wind moves against the stone. 3 things happen almost at once. Barristan Selmy moves first. He is 61 years old, and has fought in more battles than most men in this room have heard named, and he has served more kings than he expected to outlive, and he goes to one knee in the rushes of Winterfell's great hall with the ease of a man for whom kneeling before a lawful ruler is not submission, but recognition. He does not look uncertain. He looks, for the first time in a long time, entirely at peace with himself. Jaime Lannister, standing near the high table, does not move. His hand does not go to his sword. His face does something complicated. Not shock, because Jaime Lannister has spent 15 years surrounded by secrets and has learned to recognize the shape of one without needing to be told its contents. What crosses his face is the look of a man who is calculating, very rapidly, the distance between where he is standing and every other place he could be standing, and finding none of them better. Cersei's expression does not change at all. She is very still, the way ice is, still just before the cold that made it fails. Jon does not stay at the back of the hall. He moves through the assembled household and the royal party and the King's Guard who have spread to the hall's edges, and he walks to the front and stands before Robert with the entire room looking at him. He does not kneel. He stands in front of the King of the Seven Kingdoms and says, "I am Jon Stark." Robert looks at him for a moment. He says, "Yes, you are." He lets that sit. Then he says, "And you are also Lyanna's son, and I will not pretend otherwise again." He does not reach for the name Aegon. He does not force it. He simply turns to the room and says, "This boy will ride south with me. The realm will know the truth. The rest will be settled in council, in the proper way, with the proper lords present. But the truth is here, and has been spoken, and it will not be unspoken." He looks at Barristan, still on one knee, and says, "Rise." Then he looks at the room, and the room looks back at him, and that is the end of it. Robb finds Jon in the yard before the column assembles. He comes alone, without Theon, without any of the household boys, and he stops in front of Jon with the expression of a man who has prepared several versions of what he wants to say and cannot determine which one is the right one. "You don't have to go," Robb says finally. "Whatever he named you in there, you don't have to be it." Jon looks at him. He says, "Lord Stark is going as Hand. He's riding into King's Landing alone because of something I am. I am not going to let him do that." Robb is quiet for a moment. Then he says, "You are still my brother." Jon says, "You are still my brother." They do not embrace. They look at each other the way men look at each other, when they are not certain of the next time, when the next time might be too far away or too changed to predict. There is nothing left to say that would do any of it justice. Ghost moves from Jon's heel to the space between them, and then follows Jon toward the gate. Arya finds him near the gate as the column is forming. She pushes through the cluster of horses and servants and King's Guard with the low center of gravity determination that is already completely her own, and she grabs his arm with both hands and stops him. She is not crying. She is 9 years old, and she has decided she is not going to cry, and the effort of it is visible in her jaw. She asks, "Will you still be my brother?" Jon looks down at her. He says, "Always." She does not give him anything, no token, no farewell gift. She gives him a look that says she has put this moment away somewhere in herself where she keeps the things that matter, and then she turns and walks back into the castle without letting him see her face. The column rides south. The Stark banners watch from the battlements. Grey direwolf on white, the banner of the house that will stand in Winterfell when the gates close. Robb is at the top of the wall, and Jon doesn't look back. But he knows. He can feel the north at his back the way you feel a fire you are walking away from. Cersei's wheelhouse takes the road with the curtains drawn. She sits across from Joffrey and Myrcella and Tommen, and she does not look back at Winterfell at all. She is already past it. She is already in King's Landing, in the rooms she knows, in the city where her network lives, and her family's money moves, and her brother waits. And the game has not ended merely because one man stood up in a hall and said something the North will remember, and the South is not yet ready to believe. The road south takes weeks. The column moves at the pace a wheelhouse sets, which is not fast, and the weather is variable enough that some mornings feel like autumn, and others like the last gasp of summer, pressing up from the south to meet them. Robert rides beside Jon when the weather is good. He does not make it ceremonial. He simply pulls his horse alongside Jon's and rides, and after the first few days, Jon stops being surprised by it. Robert talks. He talks the way he apparently used to talk to Ned when they were young, and the world was smaller, directly, without the performance of kingship, without the careful distance that the Iron Throne requires of a man who has been sitting on it for 15 years. He teaches Jon the names of the houses whose banners hang above the gates of every keep and village they pass. He explains the politics of the Riverlands and the compromises those politics require, the web of old grievances and older alliances that a king must navigate without pulling any of the threads that hold it together. He talks about the Reach, the breadbasket of the realm, the place most likely to cause problems if its lord ever decided his ambitions outweighed his obligations. He talks about what a king actually does, which is mostly listening to men who want things and finding reasons to give each of them something that costs the least. Jon listens. He says little. He asks questions when he has them, and his questions are good, specific, practical, the questions of someone who is actually trying to understand, rather than appear to understand. Robert notices this. He does not say so, but Jon can see it in the way Robert answers him, with more detail than he probably gives anyone else these days. It is the strangest thing about the road south. They are not father and son. They are not king and heir in any way either of them can fully accept yet. They are, for now, just a man and a boy riding through a kingdom the man has ruled for 15 years, and the boy is seeing for the first time. And somehow that is enough to carry them both through a day without the weight of everything else landing on them. On the other side of the column, Cersei uses the road differently. Wherever the column stops for the night, she finds Jaime at some point, in the corridor of whatever inn or castle has opened its doors to the king's party, at the far end of a camp that stretches long enough to hide a quiet conversation. She speaks in a register that does not carry. Jaime listens. He always listens. It is one of the few things she has always been able to count on. But listening is not agreeing, and she can feel the difference in the quality of his silence now in a way she could not before Winterfell. She asks him what he intends to do. He asks her what she intends. She says what she has always said in every version of this conversation across 15 years, to protect their children. Jaime does not ask which children she means. He does not ask because he is afraid of her answer, and he is afraid of her answer because he does not know any more what he will do when she gives it. King's Landing announces itself before you see it. The smell reaches the column first. 10,000 fires, the harbour, the density of 300,000 people living in a city built for fewer, and then the noise, and then the walls. Jon sees it for the first time from the crest of a low rise south of the Blackwater, and it is enormous in a way that Winterfell, which felt like the whole world when you were inside it, is simply not. It sprawls. It rises. It is gilded and filthy in equal measure. The towers of the Red Keep, catching the afternoon light above a city of close-packed streets and open sewers and market squares, so crowded with people and noise that you cannot see the ground. Barristan Selmy rides beside Jon as they enter through the city gates. The crowd that has gathered to watch the column enter is not small, and it is not quiet. Jon keeps his face neutral, the way Ned has always taught him. He watches the faces watching him. Curious, mostly, a few hostile, many simply indifferent with the indifference of people who have lived under the shadow of the Red Keep long enough that the king's return is an event and not a wonder. Jon says, without taking his eyes off the gate ahead. What was he like? Rhaegar Targaryen. Barristan does not answer immediately. He rides for a long moment, looking at the road. Then he says, "He was the finest man I ever served." Jon looks at the Red Keep rising above the city ahead of them, its towers dark against the pale sky. He does not reply. Jon is given chambers in the Tower of the Hand, one floor below Ned's quarters. They are larger than anything he has had before, which means very little, because he has had a bastard's room in a northern keep and nothing since. He walks the perimeter of them that first night and finds the gesture strange, a room this size, and only him in it. Ghost fills some of it, white and enormous across the foot of the bed, but the room is still too large. Robert tells the small council that Jon is present as a royal ward for the time being, that the formal succession process will proceed through the proper channels, that nothing is to be announced publicly until the correct form has been observed. The small council is not blind. Within a day the whispers have started in the corridors and the servants' passages and the rooms where the court's lesser members gather to make sense of what the greater ones do. No one says anything to Jon directly. They watch him instead, in the way the court watches everything, from angles, through other people, with the systematic attention of a place that has no other way to feel safe. Ned begins his work, as Hound, in the rooms where Jon Arryn worked before him, with the papers Jon Arryn left behind, and the awareness that Jon Arryn is dead, and the reason for it has not been resolved. He knows what King's Landing does to honest men. He knew it before he agreed to come, and he came anyway. He meets with the small council and takes the measure of each of them, those waiting to see which way the wind blows, and those who have already chosen their wind and are simply waiting for the storm. He is careful. He says little. He watches. Jon walks the Red Keep alone one evening when the corridors are quiet. He has been here long enough to learn the main routes, and short enough that he still finds new ones by accident, new passages that double back on themselves, or open onto galleries overlooking rooms he did not know existed. One of them opens onto a high gallery above the throne room, and he stops there and looks down. The Iron Throne is below him. It is vast and ugly and unmistakable. 1,000 blades fused together into something that does not look like a seat of power, so much as a wound that never healed, sharp at every angle, built to remind the person sitting on it that the realm was not given to them. Jon looks at it for a long time. He does not go down to the floor. He does not approach the throne or touch the steps, or do anything that would bring him closer to it. He just stands in the gallery in the dim light and looks, and Ghost sits beside him. And after a while, he turns and walks back the way he came. The throne room of the Red Keep is not built for quiet moments. It is built for the opposite, for the display of power, for the accumulated weight of 7 dynasties pressing down from the vaulted ceiling, for the kind of ceremony that reminds everyone present how small they are, relative to the institution they are inside. Robert has always hated it. He has held court here for 15 years and never grown comfortable with the scale of the room, the way it turns every spoken word into something that echoes. But today, he stands at the base of the Iron Throne, not on it, and he reads from a prepared document in the voice of a man who has made a decision and intends to be heard. The decree names Jon Snow as the legitimate son of Rhaegar Targaryen, Crown Prince of the Seven Kingdoms, and Lyanna Stark of Winterfell, born of a lawful marriage solemnized in Dawn before a septon of the faith. It declares that under the laws of the realm, this son, named Aegon Targaryen, the sixth of his name, is the rightful male line heir to the dynasty of Aegon the Conqueror, and that Robert Baratheon, first of his name, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, does hereby recognize this claim and tender the abdication of any competing Targaryen succession rights while retaining his crown and his lordship of the Stormlands for the duration of his natural life. Barristan Selmy, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, stands at Robert's left hand and witnesses the reading and the signing. When Robert is finished, Barristan takes the quill and signs his own name beneath without hesitation. The assembled court does not produce a sound for a long moment after. Then the reactions come, and they come in layers. The first layer is the lords who have spent their entire adult lives in proximity to the Iron Throne, and have learned that when a sitting king does something official in the throne room, the correct initial response is deference, regardless of private opinion. These men go to their knees, half the room, more or less, on reflex, because a king has spoken, and the room is still full of his guards. The second layer is the lords who are frozen, who understand enough of succession law to comprehend what has just happened, and are not yet certain what it means for them, for their houses, for the alliances and marriages and financial arrangements that were all structured around a different answer to the question of who sits on that throne after Robert. These men do not kneel and do not speak, and do not reach for any weapon. They stand in the carefully maintained blankness of powerful people who are thinking very hard and showing none of it. No one calls it treason. Robert is alive and in the room and has not finished looking at them. Jon stands to Robert's right, through all of it. He is wearing better clothes than he wore in Winterfell, because someone on the household staff arranged it without asking him, and he looks somewhat like a young lord of a southern house, and not at all like a king. He looks like a 15-year-old who is standing very still, because moving would make things worse, watching 200 people rearrange their understanding of the world around him, and who wishes with the whole of himself that he were somewhere that was not this room. This is noted by everyone present. It is noted differently by different people. Some find it reassuring. A boy who does not want power may be more careful with it. Others find it disqualifying for exactly the same reason. Joffrey stands at his mother's left side near the high pillars. He is 12 years old, and Cersei has been his primary teacher in all things political, since before he could write his name. And so he doesn't look at Robert during the decree or at Jon. He looks at Cersei. He watches her face and mirrors it. Smooth, composed, a mask with nothing behind it that you are permitted to read. He is 12, but he has learned this lesson well. He does not understand all the legal language in the document Robert has just read. He understands one thing with perfect clarity. He is no longer the heir to the Iron Throne. He looks then at Jon, at the dark-haired boy in the southern clothes standing beside his stepfather, who is not his stepfather, and what crosses Joffrey's face in that moment is not the careful blankness Cersei taught him. It is something older and simpler, immediate and without a mask. It is hatred, clean and sudden, the first real emotion Joffrey has had since they arrived in this city. That night, Cersei sends a message to Casterly Rock. She does not use a raven. Ravens leave records. The Maester who sends them has a memory, and Maesters talk. She uses a servant she has trusted for 8 years, a woman who knows the road west and can carry a message in her head without writing. The message is brief. Robert has made a grave error. The family must prepare to respond. She does not elaborate. Tywin Lannister, who receives the message 3 days later in the Great Hall of Casterly Rock, does not send a reply. His silence is the reply. It contains everything Cersei needs to know. Jaime finds her after the servant has gone. He has the expression he wears when he already knows the answer to what he is about to ask. He says, "What have you done?" She tells him. He is quiet. Then he says, "You are starting a war." She says, "Robert started it." Jaime looks at her for a long moment. It is a specific look, one she has seen before, but not often. The look of a man who has followed someone into very bad situations many times, and is standing at the edge of one now and is, for the first time in a long time, noticing that this is what he is doing. He does not say anything else. He turns and leaves. Jon goes to Robert's solar late, after the household has quieted. He knocks and goes in and stands in the center of the room and asks a direct question, because it is the only kind of question he knows how to ask. "What do you want from me?" Robert looks up from the papers on his desk. He says, "I don't want anything from you." He says it the way he has been saying the true things lately. Plainly, without the theatrics that used to accompany everything he felt. "I owe you a life. I killed your father. I built my throne on your mother's name, and I let Ned keep you in a hall with the servants for 15 years, because it was easier than the truth. What I want is for you to be safe," Jon says. "A lord of Winterfell would be safe enough." Robert looks at him. "You know you are not just a lord of Winterfell." Jon does not answer that. He stands with it for a moment, and then he turns and goes back to his room, and Robert watches the door close behind him and sits alone in his solar, with the papers and the candles going low. A month passes after the decree, and Jon learns that King's Landing is a different kind of dangerous from anything Winterfell prepared him for. In Winterfell, he knew the danger. He was a bastard in a house that loved him and resented him simultaneously, and the edges of that were clear enough to navigate. Here the danger has no clear edges. It comes from directions he cannot anticipate, through people he has not yet learned to read, in a language of suggestion and implication and carefully arranged proximity that Ned keeps trying to teach him, and that Jon keeps having to relearn, because his instinct is always to respond directly, and directly is almost never the right move in a room full of courtiers. Ned teaches him the same lesson every time, in different formulations. Watch, listen, do not react to provocation. Let them show you their hand before you play yours. The people who want you gone will tell you how they intend to remove you if you give them enough time and enough silence. Jon is learning, with the particular patience of someone who understands that this is survival and not merely etiquette, to be the kind of quiet that the court cannot read. He has one advantage Ned keeps pointing out. They do not know what to make of him. A boy who looks like a Stark and carries a Targaryen name and moves like neither is a shape the court has not encountered before, and unfamiliarity buys time. Cersei buys something else. Within weeks of the decree, she has arranged a network of watchers, not Lannister men, nothing traceable, nothing that carries her name. She works through an intermediary she does not name to anyone, a man who understands that uncertainty in the succession is a market like any other market, and who charges accordingly. The watchers are servants, mostly, people with routine access to Jon's corridors, his training schedule, the hours he moves between the Tower of the Hand and the yards and the Great Hall. They track his habits and his routes and the times when he is without company. They report. Cersei reads the reports and waits. Barristan Selmy notices the watchers before Jon does. He has spent 40 years keeping men alive in the proximity of power, and the shape of surveillance is one he recognizes the way a sailor recognizes the color of a storm sky. He says nothing until he is certain, and when he is certain, he waits until one afternoon in the training yard, when Jon is finishing his forms, and the other knights and squires have moved off to their own work. He steps close enough that his voice does not carry. "You are being measured, my lord," he says, "every time you walk alone, every time you leave by a door only you know. Stop walking alone." Jon lowers his practice sword and looks at him. He takes this the way he takes everything Barristan has told him, without argument, because Barristan Selmy has been right about everything he has said in the past month, and Jon has learned to account for that. He says he will change his routes. Then he asks the question he has been holding since Winterfell. "Why did you kneel in the hall before anything was signed, before any proof was given? You were the first." Barristan is quiet for a moment. He looks across the yard where the other men are working. Then he says, "Because I knew Rhaegar. I rode beside him in 3 campaigns. I stood at his door." He turns back to Jon. "You have his economy of motion when you fight. You don't waste anything. No movement that doesn't mean something. I have not seen it in 15 years. Jon holds this for a moment. He does not know what to do with it. The idea of a dead man living in the way he moves. But he files it away in the part of him that is slowly, reluctantly, building a picture. In the White Sword Tower, Jaime sits alone with the White Book. He has read his own entry more times than he would admit to anyone, not from pride, but from the opposite of pride, from the need to see in black ink exactly what the record says about him. Slew King Aerys II Targaryen, called the Mad King, upon the Iron Throne. That is what it says. No context, no explanation of the wildfire caches under the city, no mention of the 500,000 people who did not burn because a king's guard chose his sword over his oath. The record is the record, and the record does not explain. He picks up a quill and sits there with it for a long time. He does not write anything. He sets it down. He goes to find Cersei. She is in her solar, and she looks at him the way she has been looking at him since Winterfell, measuring, calculating, with the particular assessment of a person who knows all of your weaknesses and is deciding which one is most useful. He says, "I will not touch the boy." Cersei says, "No one is asking you to." Jaime says, "Yes, they are. You are. Every time you look at me, the way you're looking at me right now." She holds his gaze and says, "Then look away." He does not look away. He stands in the doorway of her solar, and he looks at her, and she looks back at him, and the thing between them that has always been the thing between them is still there, but it is wearing differently than it used to, and both of them can feel it. Jon adjusts. He takes Barristan's advice in the practical way he takes everything he has decided to accept, completely, without half measures. He changes his routes. He stops using the quiet corridors. He moves through the populated parts of the castle, the thoroughfares where there are always witnesses, and Ghost moves beside him through all of it, white and enormous, which has the additional effect of making Jon very easy to see and very inconvenient to approach without being noticed. He spends more time in the training yard. He begins to understand that visibility is a form of armor. he also begins to sit in corners of the great hall during meals rather than at the seat he has been assigned, not from discourtesy, but because corners give you the whole room, and the whole room is information. He learns to listen to the court the way Ned taught him, attending to what people say when they have forgotten he is there. Tyrion arrives from the wall on an afternoon in late autumn, his horse looking exhausted and his expression looking satisfied in the particular way of a man who has just done something he genuinely enjoyed and is returning to something he genuinely has not missed. He appears in the yard, and the Red Keep absorbs him the way it absorbs everything, and by evening he has already found out most of what has happened in his absence, because Tyrion Lannister has a talent for receiving information that amounts almost to a natural phenomenon. He encounters Jon in a corridor the next morning. This time, neither of them walks away. Tyrion stops and looks up at him. Tyrion is not a tall man. Jon is not yet a tall man, but the difference is noticeable, and says, "So you're the boy who's unmade my nephew's life." Jon looks at him. He says nothing. Tyrion says, "I am not my nephew, or my sister." He glances along the corridor, finds a bench set against the wall, sits on it, and produces from somewhere about his person a small flask and 2 cups, which he fills and holds one out to Jon. "Sit down." Jon looks at the cup. He looks at Tyrion. He sits. It happens in a corridor near the old armory, a seldom used passage that Jon has found useful precisely because it is seldom used, or had found useful, before Barristan's warning. Tonight he has taken it again, because Barristan is not with him, and the route is shorter, and he is tired in the way a person gets tired when they have been managing their own caution for weeks without rest. He is coming back from the library in the Tower of the Hand, carrying a candle and a book that Ned recommended, and the corridor is dark past the reach of the candle flame, and the 2 men come out of a doorway on his left before he hears them. Ghost moves first. The direwolf is faster than a dog and larger than most men's imaginations of what a dog can be, and the snarl that comes out of him is the only warning Jon gets. Ghost launches himself between Jon and the first man with the full weight of his body, and the first man goes backward and down, and Jon drops the book and has his sword out by the time the second man closes the distance. The fight is brief. Brevity is what Ghost provides, what the size of him provides, what the sound of him in an enclosed stone corridor provides. The first man scrambles up and runs. The second man takes a look at Jon's sword, and at the direwolf pressing forward with blood on his teeth, and follows. Jon stands in the passage with his heart loud in his chest, and the candle guttering on the floor where it has fallen, and the book fanned open beside it. Ghost circles back to him. There is a cut along his left flank where a blade has found the gap in his reach, not deep, but bleeding, the white fur going red. Jon puts his hand on Ghost's neck and breathes. Ned learns of it before dawn, from Barristan, who learned it from a guardsman who heard the noise and investigated and found the passage empty and the book on the floor. By the time Ned goes to Robert, the sky outside is just beginning to pale at its eastern edge. Robert is awake. He is sitting at his desk with papers in front of him that are not the wine cup that would have been there 6 months ago, and his face has the clarity of a man who has been sleeping badly, not from despair, but from the particular sleeplessness of someone who has things to do, and the days are not long enough. He listens to Ned's report without interrupting. When Ned finishes, he asks 2 questions. Is the boy alive? Ned says yes, unharmed. Robert says, Ghost? Ned says, wounded, not dead. Robert sits back. He says, then we still have time. Ned spends the next 3 days tracing the men. He does not find them. They are already gone, out of King's Landing by routes he cannot recover, but he finds the shape of what paid for them. Gold, moving through 3 separate brokers, each of whom knew only the layer below and the layer above, none of whom knew the source. It is Lannister gold. Not in provenance anyone can point to in a court of law, not with the kind of chain of evidence that a Maester could sign his name to. But the method is the method of someone who has used gold to solve problems before and knows how to put enough distance between the money and the hand that spends it. He tells Robert, "I cannot bring this before judges." Robert says, "I'm not asking for judges." Tyrion appears at Jon's door the following morning with the expression of a man who has something to say and has been deciding how to say it since before he knocked. Jon lets him in. Tyrion sits in the chair by the window without being invited and looks at Ghost, whose flank has been bandaged by a Maester, and then at Jon. "My sister sent those men," Tyrion says. Jon says, "I don't know that." Tyrion says, "I do." He is not performing certainty. He says it with the flat quality of someone reporting a fact they wish were otherwise. He is quiet for a moment, looking at the window. Then he says, "I want to offer you something. I have eyes in this city that my sister does not know about, in places she cannot reach. I will put them to work for you." He looks back at Jon. "In exchange for one thing. When this is finished, when Robert has done whatever he is going to do, and the House of Cards comes down, Tommen and Myrcella are not punished for what their mother did. They are 8 and 9 years old. They did not choose her." Jon says, "I am not a king. I don't have the authority to promise anything." Tyrion looks at him steadily. "You will be," he says, "and I am not asking you to promise it as a king. Promise it as a man." Jon looks at him for a long moment. He looks at the window. He thinks about Winterfell, about Robb saying, "You are still my brother," about the book on the floor of the dark passage and Ghost's blood on white fur. He looks back at Tyrion and says, "I promise it. As a man." Tyrion nods. He stands, smoothing his coat. At the door he pauses and looks back, and he says, not with sentiment exactly, but with the honesty of someone who doesn't often speak without calculation, and is choosing to do so now. "You look nothing like a Targaryen. You look like my friend Ned Stark's son." Jon says, "I am." Tyrion says, "Yes. That is why I am helping you." He goes out. Robert has not been idle. In the week since the decree, he has been moving through the preparations the way he used to move through a campaign, methodically, without the bursts of enthusiasm that sometimes overtook him in the field, with the grinding patience of a man who knows that what he is doing is right and that right does not always move quickly. He has spoken with Barristan, who has in turn spoken quietly with each of the Kingsguard members Barristan trusts, which is not all of them, but is enough. He has drafted papers for the small council, documents that lay out the evidence, the succession chain, the legal architecture of what he intends to do with Cersei's secret when the time comes to do it in front of witnesses. He has not told Cersei. He has not told anyone outside the small circle of Ned and Barristan, and, as of this morning, Tyrion. The evening after Jon's conversation with Tyrion, Robert stands at the window of his solar and looks out at King's Landing. The city goes about its noise below him, indifferent as it always is. 300,000 people living their lives under the shadow of the Red Keep without any particular interest in what happens inside it, so long as the bread stays affordable and the gold dragons keep changing hands. He has ruled this city for 15 years. He has ruled it on the bones of a lie, and on the proceeds of a war he won for the wrong reasons, and for a woman whose name he couldn't say without it costing him something. He looks at it now and does not feel the heaviness he used to feel. He feels something that is closer to readiness. Ned is standing behind him. Robert says, "I was a better man on the battlefield." Ned says, "Yes, but this is a different kind of battle." Robert looks at the city for another moment. Then he turns from the window and goes back to his desk. Robert calls Cersei to his solar in the morning, and the small council is already assembled when she arrives. Ned is standing at the window. Barristan Selmy is at the door. The members of the small council are seated, their faces carrying the particular blankness of men who know enough to understand the gravity, and not enough to know which way to lean. Cersei reads the room in the time it takes her to cross from the door to the chair Robert indicates. She sits, looks at Robert, and does not look afraid. She has known since Robert's decree that this confrontation was coming, and whatever she has prepared is already running in her head as she arranges her hands in her lap and waits. Robert places the documents on the table. Jon Arryn's notes, retrieved by Ned before they left King's Landing in those first chaotic days after the old man's death. The genealogies Jon Arryn had assembled, going back 4 generations through the Baratheon line, tracing the colouring that the blood produces, the dark of it, the consistency of it across every Baratheon branch in every generation that could be found in the records of the realm. Robert does not explain the documents at length. He sets them down and names what they are and says, "You have seen these before. Jon Arryn showed them to you. That is why Jon Arryn is dead." Cersei says nothing. Robert says, "All 3 children, Joffrey, Myrcella, Tommen. None of them mine." The room is very quiet. Cersei looks at the documents and then at Robert. She says, "What do you want, Robert?" Robert tells her what he wants, and it is not what she has spent 15 years being afraid it would be. He does not want her dead. He is not going to have her tried for treason, not because she does not deserve judgment, but because the trial would require her children to be examined as evidence, and her children did not choose their parentage any more than Jon Snow chose his. What Robert wants is an end to the lie. The children, Joffrey, Myrcella, Tommen, will be stripped of the Baratheon name. They will not be harmed. He is not their father, and he cannot give them the name of their actual father, and he will not give them a name that belongs to another man's blood. They will be provided for, housed, educated, given whatever a Lannister child requires, but they will not carry his name into the succession. Cersei will leave King's Landing. She will go to Casterly Rock, and she will remain there under the authority of Tywin Lannister, who is her father and who Robert trusts to keep her from further mischief more than he trusts any cell in this city. Her father is now her keeper. Robert says this plainly, without satisfaction, as a man announces a settlement rather than a victory. Cersei listens to all of this. Her face does not change. Then she turns, not to Robert, but to the far side of the room, where Jaime Lannister has been standing against the wall for the past quarter of an hour, having been summoned to Robert's solar with no explanation of why. Jaime has been standing there, listening. He has not moved or reached for his sword or done anything except stand very still, with the expression of a man who arrived at a meeting he did not fully understand, and now understands it completely and wishes he did not. Cersei looks at him. She says, "Say what they are, your children. Say it out loud, and let them try to execute a king's guard for speaking the truth about his own blood." The room holds its breath. Jaime does not speak immediately. He looks at Joffrey, who has been brought in and placed near his mother, and who has the wide, uncertain eyes of a 12-year-old boy who understands that something important is happening to him, and has not been told what. Jaime looks at Joffrey, and then at Cersei, and then at Robert, who is watching him with the flat, patient attention of a man who has made his decision already, and is now waiting to see which decision Jaime will make. Jaime opens his mouth. He does not speak for a long time. Then he says, "They are mine." He says it quietly, not with defiance, not the performance of a man making a stand. He says it the way a man says something that is true and that he is done pretending is not. I am their father. I will not pretend otherwise to protect myself. Do with me what you will. Robert looks at him for a long moment. What crosses Robert's face is not triumph. It is closer to the thing that crosses a man's face when someone does something unexpected and decent, and the unexpectedness of it is itself a kind of judgment on the world that produced it. He says, "I told a Lannister once I would not punish a man for his honor. I was better at keeping promises before I was king." He looks at Barristan. He says, "Escort Ser Jaime to the cells, not the black cells, regular cells with a window, until I have decided what can be done with a king's guard who is also a father." Barristan steps forward. Jaime does not resist. He hands his sword to Barristan with the unhurried motion of a man who has long practice giving up his sword and finding it again, and then he walks toward the door. At the threshold, he turns and looks at Cersei. One look. It carries everything two people can carry between them when they have known each other for 30 years. And this is the room where it ends. Cersei does not look back. She is already looking at the table. 2 guards escort Cersei from the solar a few minutes later. She does not weep. She walks with the unhurried composure of a woman who has had 15 years of practice moving through rooms that wish her ill and not letting them know she has noticed. She is already calculating. The steps available to her have narrowed considerably in the past hour. She can feel the narrowing the way you feel a corridor closing. But she is not a woman who has ever stopped moving simply because the path got difficult. At the door she stops and looks back at Ned. She says, "You think you have won something?" Ned says nothing. She says, "The realm will tear itself apart over a bastard king named for a man he never met." Ned says, "He is not a bastard." She looks at him. "He was this morning," she says, and then she goes. Jon is not in the solar. He has not been part of any of this. Robert's decision, from the beginning, was to keep Jon away from the confrontation, to spare him the particular cruelty of watching his existence be argued over by the people it damages. Tyrion finds him within the hour and tells him everything, quickly, without softening, because Jon has made clear he prefers the direct version of things, and Tyrion finds it easier to provide. Jon listens. When Tyrion is done, Jon asks, "What happens now?" Tyrion says, "A war, most likely. Not a war of armies, not yet. A war of ravens and letters and money. Tywin Lannister in the Westerlands, Stannis Baratheon at Dragonstone watching for an opening. Silence from every direction that has something to gain from uncertainty." He pauses. "It will be a long fight." Jon takes this in. Then he asks, "Where are Tommen and Myrcella?" Tyrion says, "Their rooms. No one has explained anything to them. Tommen believes he is being kept inside because of bad weather." Jon says, "I will speak to them." Tyrion says, "You don't have to." Jon says, "I know." He goes. Jon goes to find Tommen and Myrcella before he does anything else. He had promised Tyrion, and he had promised himself, and he is not a person who finds it easy to let a promise sit. He knocks on the door of the rooms where they have been kept and goes in, and the awkwardness of the next few minutes is complete. Tommen is 8 years old. He looks at Jon with the wide, uncertain attention of a child who has been told, recently, and not very clearly, that something large has changed around him. He asks, "Are you really a prince?" Jon looks at him and says, "Something like that." It is not a satisfying answer, but it is the truest one he has available. Tommen appears to consider it with the solemnity of a boy who is taking the situation seriously, because the adults around him are. And then he nods. Miss Ella is 9, and carries herself like a girl who has been trained in courtesy since before she fully understood what courtesy was for. She thanks Jon for coming. She does it formally, with the phrasing of someone who has had the exact right words drummed into her for years. And underneath the courtesy, she is watching him the way a child watches a thing that might be dangerous and has not yet determined whether it is. Jon tells them both nothing changes about what they are allowed to do in this castle today. They are safe. Whatever grown people decided before they were born is not something children carry the blame for. He says it directly, because they deserve a direct answer, and because no one else appears to have given them one. He stands in the corridor outside their door for a moment before he walks on. The ravens go out in the weeks that follow. Robert sends word to the great houses of Westeros confirming the succession decree, naming Jon, Aegon Targaryen, 6th of his name, as the recognized heir. The responses come back at different speeds from different directions. Some lords send formal acknowledgement, the measured language of men who are accepting the situation for now and reserving their opinions for later. Some send nothing at all. From Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon sends no reply. His silence is the loudest thing in the kingdom. He is a man who considered himself Robert's rightful heir, who had been investigating Cersei's secret alongside Jon Arryn before Jon Arryn died, and he will not receive a decree that supersedes his own claim without a reckoning that has not yet arrived. The Westerlands are also silent. Tywin Lannister does not declare and does not threaten. He simply does not answer. No armies move, but silence from certain directions is its own kind of weather, and Robert knows how to read it. Robert goes to Jaime's cell one morning and sits across from him in the plain light that comes through the single window. Jaime is not in the black cells. He is in an ordinary room with a bed and a window, and he looks like a man who has slept, which is more than Robert expected. Robert tells him there are 2 choices: the Wall or a quiet exile from Westeros, passage on a ship, a destination of his choosing, a life elsewhere without rank or title, but also without a cell, not execution. Robert says plainly that he is not going to execute Jaime Lannister, not because Jaime does not deserve judgment, but because Robert has spent 15 years punishing men for the wrong reasons, and he intends to stop. Jaime looks at him for a long moment. He says, "Why?" Robert says, "You killed Aerys to save the city. There were caches of wildfire under half of King's Landing, and a mad king about to order them lit, and you put your sword through him and stopped it, and never told anyone. And you have carried the name Kingslayer for 15 years, for an act that saved 500,000 lives." He pauses. "And you admitted to your children in front of a room full of witnesses when you could have said nothing and walked free. A man who does both of those things deserves better than a black cell." Jaime is quiet for a long time. He says, "Exile." Jon goes to Robert that evening. He has been carrying the things that have accumulated since Winterfell. Tyrion's words, Ned's words, the corridor with the 2 men, and Ghost's blood on white fur. The throne room with 200 people rearranging themselves around his existence. The children's rooms, and Tommen's question, and the corridor afterward. He has been carrying all of it, and turning it over, and he has arrived at what he thinks is an honest place. He stands before Robert and says, "I am not ready to be a king." Robert says, "No one ever is." Jon says, "I don't want the Iron Throne." Robert says, "Good. I didn't want it either, and look what came of that." Jon says, "I want to earn whatever I carry, not because a name was given to me, not because a father I never met had a crown. I want to be worth it first." Robert looks at him for a long time. The look of a man who has been studying the boy across from him since a Godswood in the north, watching for something he was not sure he would recognize if he found it. He says, "Lyanna would have said exactly that." He says it without grief. For almost the first time, the name comes out of him without the weight it has always carried, the 15 years of accumulated loss. There is something lighter in it, something that is not quite the absence of grief, but is grief wearing differently, grief that has somewhere to go at last. He says, "You don't have to take the throne tomorrow. The realm needs to see that you exist and that you are worth following. Not because of your blood, because of what you are." Jon says, "What am I?" Robert says, "You are Ned Stark's son, and Lyanna's, and Rhaegar's, all three of them at once, and that combination has never existed before in the history of this world." Jon looks out the window at King's Landing, going about its business below. He says, "Jon, I will be Jon." He says it the way a person says a thing they have had to fight to keep. "Whatever else I have to be, I will be Jon first." Robert says, "Then be Jon. The rest will follow." Later, Jon stands at the window of the Tower of the Hand, with Ghost beside him. The city is loud and indifferent below, doing what cities do, moving, spending, arguing, carrying on in the way of a place that does not pause for the dramas of the people above it. Ned appears in the doorway behind him. He does not speak. Jon does not turn around. They stand in the room together, the man who kept the promise, and the boy who was the promise, and neither of them needs to say anything about it. Ghost presses against Jon's leg, warm and solid. Somewhere else in this building, Robert Baratheon is sitting in his solar, with papers that will take years to settle. But he is sitting in it, sober and purposeful for the first time in a very long time. And he got there through a boy he did not know existed, until a crypt in the north, and a night of grief, and a decision to stop lying about what he owed. Jon looks at the city. It is enough. That's our theory. Westeros is a land filled with exciting stories and possibilities, and we love exploring them. If you want to accompany us on this journey across the 7 kingdoms and beyond, then please like, share, and subscribe.